I'm seated here today at the site where the Mormon Handcart expedition started for Salt Lake City. It was one of the great ventures in Western migration, the first time anything like this had been tried. But the Mormons were having difficulty in Illinois around Nauvoo. They were not welcome, and so they had arranged to set up their home in Salt Lake City and in Utah. So the first groups of Mormons had gone by ox team from Nauvoo and across the southern part of Iowa. That was very slow with ox team, and so they wanted to, and also rather expensive, so they wanted to get a better method. So they decided that they could do it much more economically and also move faster if they did it with hand carts, which the Mormons pushed. So these people were brought over from England. There were Mormon churches over there, and they were having difficulty economically. The mills in England were not doing well. The coal mines in Wales were shut down much of the time, and there was economic distress in Denmark and in Sweden, in Norway. So these people were willing to come to America. Of course, in those days, everybody wanted to come to America. You know, the streets were paved with gold. So they wanted to come to this country, and it was easy for them to get lined up by the Mormons. Of course, these were poor people. They had no money to pay their passage on the ship or their rail fare. So the Mormon Church had an organization where they could handle the expense of this. And they found that the best way, the shortest way, the most economic way was for these people to go by boat from Liverpool, England, to Boston, Massachusetts. And there they were put on a train to New York City, and in New York City they boarded a train for Chicago. And of course they were a day or so in Chicago, and then they came on to Iowa City. Now the point where they set up their camp was 2 miles west of Iowa City. Actually, West High is off to our left, about a half a mile, and we're about a quarter of a mile west of Finkbein Golf Course, and we're a mile and a half north of Coralville. So that sort of adjusts you, or fixes the point where we're sitting in your mind. And this is where they brought these Mormons when they first landed in Iowa City. They spent a couple of nights in the depot, and then they came on out here, and there was a veritable tent city stretching on west where these Mormons stayed. I believe there were 20-some tents. No, there were more than that. Well, anyhow, there were around 2,000 people that came in those 2 months. They went west from here in 5 handcart brigades. They divided them up so that they would be smaller units, and they put some of the Mormon missionaries in charge. They were very strict about how much they could carry, only a certain amount of clothing, only a certain amount of comforters. The food was limited as to how much they could take, and so it was an ordeal to make the trip. And to top it off, there were 3 women to every man, and there were many children, and there were many old men. I've read the diary of Archer Walters, who told day by day as to what happened. Archer came with his wife and 5 children, ranging in age from 6 to 18. And he was a carpenter, and so he records in there all the problems that they had. Of course, at first, the hand carts were not ready when they got here, and so that took some time, and that's why they had to camp here for quite a period. And then some of them, the voyage over, the train ride, the change in food was difficult for them, and a number of them died. Some en route on the boat, some on the train, and there were 6 who died while they were in camp here. We'll later show you the point where they were buried. So it was a great deal of hardship because it was the first time it had been tried. Well, the first 3 handcarts brigades that went west, they started out. They went through Marengo, Grinnell, Newton, Des Moines, Adel, on west to Council Bluffs. And then the Council Bluffs, they went north on the Missouri River to a point right opposite Florence, and that was sort of a headquarters. There were many Mormons there. In fact, I remember one time being in Florence and going up on the hill to the west, and there's a cemetery up there, and it gives the names and the dates that these people died when they were in getting set to make the rest of the journey. It's a distressing situation, and yet out of it, these people did build a great church organization in Salt Lake, and today, of course, they're one of the strongest religious organizations in the country. Well, anyhow, they came this far, and they were delayed quite some time because the carts weren't ready. And of course, out on the frontier, there were not the supplies that they needed to make them. But they actually had wheelwrights who could, and carpenters who could build them, and they finally got them together. Well, the first three companies got through fairly well. They made it within, I believe, about 70 days. There were 5 people to a handcart, and they had all their earthly possessions in the handcart. Then they also had 1 or 2 ox teams with each outfit carrying the heavier things, some of the food supplies and some of the necessities that they had to carry. But for the most part, they were carried very, very little of their worldly possessions with them. And this diary of Archer Walters is just heart-rending. He tells how one day he tells each night what happened. And Brother Smith's wife died today, and so-and-so's baby was sick, and all these things that happened. And later on, they tell how they were able to shoot some buffalo, and they ate a little bit better then. But these first 3 companies got through in good shape. The other 2 were delayed quite some time getting their wagons together, and so they didn't get started until the middle of July and the latter part of the month, and that was too late. They never should have gone on. One of the men tried to reason with them and told them they should stay over in Florence that winter. But these people were anxious to get to Salt Lake. This was the promised land, and so they kept on going. And when they got into Wyoming, they got into snowstorms. They got into terrible situations. And I think there were around 60 people that died from this winter situation in Wyoming. But they finally made it, and those were 5 companies that went the first year. I have a book that lists all of the people that were in each company, and it's surprising what excellent records they kept. Then the next year, there were 5 more companies that came out. 3 of them came to Iowa City and started from here, and 2 others went to St. Louis, and then I believe they went up the Missouri River to Omaha, and then they started from this town of Florence, which is on the north edge of Omaha, and they went from there on into Salt Lake City. Those groups, the second year, did much better. They knew more about what they were doing. They knew when they should start and when they shouldn't, and so those groups made it in pretty good time. There were some other companies that went as late as 1860, and that was the end of the handcart migration to Salt Lake.